The League One playoffs got underway in East London on a sunny Saturday lunchtime. Leyton Orient and Stockport drew 2-2 in a game full of goalmouth action and potential talking points. I think within the first 5-6 minutes, both teams had a shot on target, and that really did sort of set the tone. Of course, Stockport did what they do. They fell behind, and then they came roaring back in the second half. Charlie Kelman opened the scoring. Charlie Kelman was quite clearly offside. You can only assume that both the referee and the linesman missed Omar Beckel's flick on. I was expecting it to be one of those where the goal is scored, Stockport players complain, referee goes over to linesman and says, oh, by the way, Beckel's got a flick on, and then the flag goes up. That didn't happen. I think they must have both missed it. But of course, Charlie Kelman, master craftsman, finishing off the chance. He has been in excellent form recently. But as I said, after the break, Stockport came roaring back, and Fraser Horsfall seemed to be at the centre of everything.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, the game was really interesting because both halves had a broadly similar pattern. Stockport better to start both halves. Tactically more comfortable, able to build attacks in exactly the way that they wanted. Leyton Orient were finding it way more difficult to do that. And in both halves, Orient came on a lot stronger in the second part of the half, which just led to a brilliant game, really. I mean, Wellens watches the game, doesn't he, from not from the technical area, from the dugout, from the stand. That's not just because he's always suspended, but also because he wants to have a better view tactically, which obviously it does give you. He was back down in the technical area by about the 20th minute, and I think that kind of summed it up. He just wasn't happy at all with how the game was playing out, and you could understand it. He's in a bit of a bind, Wellens, where because Curry's been out injured, but he basically said he had to switch to three at the back with wing backs towards the end of the season because of personnel issues, and that was just the way that he had to play it. He even said in the post-match here, I don't like playing three centre-backs. I don't like playing three centre-backs, but you've got to adapt. It just caused them problems here, where Stockport were able to get down the sides with Alafe on the left, with Fevrier on the right, pretty much whenever they wanted, whether it was long passing from Norwood or from Ethan Pye in particular, clip balls into the channels. With the speed of those two, with Alafe's movement and speed and physicality, he's got really good upper body strength. So even though he's not a great dribbler, he can latch on to balls into the channel really well. And with Fevrier, who's just, I mean, the service out to him was brilliant. Some of the passing out wide from Moxon, Norwood, Pye was brilliant. But what Fevrier can do 1v1 is unlike almost anyone at the level I can think of apart from Poku. He's just got so many different ways of dribbling past a man, whether it's three dummy crosses and then eventually pulling one out when the defender is practically on the floor, whether it's literally standing still, doing a little hesitation and then knocking it down the line and trusting his acceleration, his burst over short distances to get the wrong side and down onto the byline, which he did 3 or 4 times. Technically he's not as good as Poku in terms of what he can do with his crossing, what he can do with his shooting, but he's such an exciting player, and this was an amazing standout performance from him to get on the radar of so many players. He was fouled for the goal that put Stockport 2-1 up. Randall Williams was just completely done at this point. He went past him, took him down, yellow card. Norwood had scored his penalty a few minutes earlier, which was, again, attack down the right-hand side, cross into the box, which Edmonds Green just got into a real muddle and ended up punching the ball away with his hand in an unnatural position. And Stockport go 2-1 up, which after the ridiculousness of the first goal, no two ways about it. It's an obviously an error of vision, and then compounded by an error of communication. That's how I see it. It's very clear that the player's offside. You can understand a scenario where the linesman, for whatever reason, has missed the flick on because he's focused on the offside line from the initial header. It's very hard to get your head around both officials missing the flick on, and then if one of them has seen it, it's very hard to get your head around them not having a conversation where they say, there was a flick on, right? Oh, right, well, in that case, he's miles offside. So that was obviously disappointing. Thought Stockport responded really, really well. And, unbelievable credit to them, quite frankly, for leading this game from a point of being one down to a goal that shouldn't have existed. But I was pretty disappointed with was I disappointed with Stockport in the last 20 minutes, or did Orient just muster something from somewhere? They did pretty well to come back into the game from that point. They should have had a penalty, and that's sort of, to me, as a neutral, it's quite a nice one to kind of cancel out the fume and the rage of the 1-0 goal. Kelman's taken down by Norwood. The ref's not far away. It's very clearly a foul. Sweeps his legs away as he knocks it past him. So Orient should have had a penalty, and then get one for one where I just feel a bit sad for Horsfall. I don't think there's really a huge amount he can do about it. Again, like you refer to the laws of the game, and with handball, I think we all know there's some that just it feels subjective to a certain degree, but it does say it's an offence if a player touches the ball with their hand or arm when it has made their body unnaturally bigger. Very clearly the case with where the ball struck his hand. And it says a player is considered to have made their body unnaturally bigger when the position of their hand or arm is not a consequence of or justifiable by the player's body movement for that specific situation. That's where I would suggest, actually, Horsfall's like trying to clear the ball, isn't he? He's kind of moving forward to do so. Is it unnatural for your hands to come up in that situation? So hard, isn't it, when it's a split-second decision, when we've all got tons of replays that slow it down so much. But I thought it was maybe on the harsh side, but it led to an equalising goal. And, from my point of view, the 2-2 scoreline is probably, in a weird way, kind of justified in that both teams had spells in both halves and scored goals to match that. I do think tactically Stockport were much stronger. I think Orient, to leave level, given that tactically they looked really uncertain for a lot of the game, I think it's actually quite impressive from their point of view. And with Wellens, you kind of expect him to improve things in the second leg on that front and come in with a slightly clearer game plan and how they can approach it. Maybe with Curry back at left back, which would probably lead to them being able to make a formation change. I think that would be the right thing to do, because it just didn't really work, to be honest. And I think in that sense specifically, they kind of got away with it a little bit to not lose this game and go back to Stockport absolutely with every chance of making the final.
One of the things that I love about two-legged ties is the fact that Leyton Orient have had this issue with Jayden Fevrier, and now, just a few days later, they need to rectify that issue. They need to come up with something.
Yeah.
It's a bit like in basketball in the playoffs when they play so many games against each other. You sort of get these really nice kind of tactical battles where, okay, you got the better of us this time, but in the next game, we need to come up with something to thwart that.
I think Orient can make some changes, probably get Curry back in, who you'd think would have a better time 1v1 against Fevrier. Might necessitate a change of shape, which gives Stockport lots to think about. But by the same token, it's worth pointing out that Lewis Bate is probably going to be ready to start here, which he wasn't. He is Stockport's captain, a very important player at the base of midfield. And actually, I thought Moxon had a pretty good game. I thought Collar had quite a quiet game. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Bate maybe coming in for Moxon, and maybe even Callum Camps coming in for Collar. And then there's also Jack Diamond, who, in terms of dribbly wide boys, wasn't able to come on and kind of give Stockport that extra energy and 1v1 dribbling ability towards the end of the game here. But should again probably be available for that cameo, which means that it's not just a case of stopping Fevrier, but possibly stopping Diamond as well. So both teams, from a tactical and team selection point of view, have loads that they can do here, which means I think the second game might look very different. And I think that adds to the intrigue.
Just on the penalties, obviously 2 penalties were given. I think for me, the first one is very clear. The second one does feel a little bit harsh because it does actually deflect onto his arm from quite close range. It's not like it's a clean shot. It deflects onto his arm, but it is outstretched. So, as you say, by the letter of the law, it is a penalty. I think Charlie Kelman's one, the trip by Norwood, that could have easily been given as well. And also, there was one down the other end where Fraser Horsfall was in a headlock. That was a classic. If we did have VAR, that would have been given as well. So I think that just kind of underlines how difficult it is for the officials.
100%. 100%. And, you definitely appreciate it more when you're at the game versus when you're watching and an incident happens. And, on TV, I find it hilarious because I like to make a snap judgment on decisions when I'm watching on TV. And I'm very regularly change my mind based on the 4 slow-mo replays that I watch, right? But I have the privilege of watching those and being able to change my mind and be like, yeah, well, I know what the right decision is. When you're at the game, you don't have the benefit of loads of replays. And so you don't really know at the game whether a decision is right or wrong. Like the Kelman offside was right in front of me. It was very obvious, very clear. There's still that part of you that's like, maybe I've missed something. Maybe the flick came off someone else and I don't have a chance to see that again. So I don't really know. And obviously these days you can get, you just WhatsApp a mate and they're like, no, that's absolutely horrendous. And you're like, okay, fair enough. But definitely being at the game, like with all of these games, I mean, the games are so quick as well. The incidents happen. There's loads of bodies around. As everyone knows, I am right at one end of the scale when it comes to being broadly sympathetic with what referees, with the decisions that they have to make, and basically the capacity for them to get it wrong, and being broadly sympathetic with that and accepting of it. But clearly it's difficult when the games are so important. And as Dave Challoner said, livelihoods, you can't really argue with the line that like the difference between promotion and staying in League One is worth, I don't know, let's say 10 million quid. For Challoner and his players and his staff and those at the club, it's absolutely ginormous from a financial point of view. Contracts they can get or don't get, being retained or released. And then from an owner's point of view, I'm not someone that spends a lot of time worrying about owners. But again, it's kind of hard to argue that if someone's paying 5 million quid to run a football club and to cover their losses, but who has a plan for their growth, and part of that plan is rising up the leagues, then obviously it's going to be really tough to swallow. So, as I said to you earlier, I think these are the games where it's all right to talk at length about big decisions. I just would prefer that the conversations that I had, like we're having now, I hope, like are thoughtful and at some points accepting that mistakes are going to happen, while also hoping that they don't and pointing out when they're wrong. But also, crucially, pointing out when they're right, even if some people think they're wrong. I think that's our... I don't have a huge responsibility to be like the oracle on refereeing decisions, and if I was a listener of the pod, I wouldn't particularly care what I think, but seemingly it's a big part of football discourse, so it's important to do it. I probably wouldn't bother if I hadn't been at the game, but just to point out that outside of all of the goals that we've talked about and the refereeing incidents that we've talked about, Wootton had a 1-on-1 early on. Ajay had a 1-on-1 early on in the second half, which didn't even make the highlights package, but was a big chance. Moxon hit the bar with a worldie from range. Beckles put one over near the end. Donnelly had a chance near the end just after Orient equalised. Like, there was just so much in the game. And that's why I really want to, hopefully you have the refereeing discussions. But I do hope that most people, and most neutrals in particular, can just enjoy what's happening outside of that as well. Tactically, it was fascinating. As George flagged up in the preview pod, I hadn't appreciated that Stockport's game plan is quite reverse mullet. Like with Brad Hills and Ibu Toure as the fullbacks, neither of whom are particularly comfortable crossing the halfway line and certainly don't get to the byline at any point. It is quite, business at the back, party up front, and it's working really well for them. And I just want to touch on Ethan Galbraith before we go, because as much as I love the performance of Jaden Fevrier, as much as I love watching Ollie Norwood play passes, which are just, unlike what anyone else at the level can do, Galbraith is some player as well, and particularly his ability to pass and move and dribble in tight spaces when he's under pressure is, remarkable. And I'm really interested to see what happens with his future, because I think he might be out of contract this summer. Orient might have an option. Regardless, he's a player that can do a lot of really good stuff, and I think everyone knows that by now, so I'd expect him to have quite a lot of interest.
Final game of the weekend was by far and away the most stereotypical playoff semi-final first leg, as Wycombe and Charlton played out a goalless draw at Adams Park. Will Norris made a couple of good saves late on to deny Matty Godden and Greg Doherty. Wycombe started fairly brightly, but their threat kind of fizzled out. Like most of the other games this weekend, there were a couple of flashpoints. On another day, both Richard Kone and Dan Udo could have received their marching orders, but it finished 11v11. Of course, it's less than 3 weeks since Charlton beat Wycombe 4-0 away from home, but this tie is still very much in the balance heading into the second leg. Ali, did Wycombe learn a few valuable lessons from that game on Easter Monday? Were Charlton possibly a bit more cautious, or was it a bit of both?
I'm sure it was a bit of both. I think if you cast your mind back to that that 4-0 game, the first goal is turned home really nicely by Lloyd Jones after, a passage of play that we saw 1,000 times tonight, with a ball pumped forward into the box, headed out wide, recycled, and a low cross, wasn't even a particularly good cross, got turned in by Jones. So decent finish out of not a huge amount. Again, the sort of attack we saw a million times tonight didn't end in that sort of moment. The second goal, you may remember, had a pretty clear foul in the build-up and was smashed into the top corner from 25 yards by Berry. And then the game really got away from Wycombe, which happens. The fact that they started strongly here was massive for them, I think. Really, really important. This tie, like some of the others that we've spoken about and we'll speak about, didn't go the way of the form book. It didn't go the way of the narrative necessarily, which was that Wycombe have been sliding and aren't in great nick under Mike Dodds, and Charlton are all-conquering team under Nathan Jones. And actually we saw a very tight game. Wycombe came out the trap strongly, as you said. Charlton finished strongly, and Norris earns himself the man of the match display, really just with what he did in the last 5 minutes of the game, but was very clearly the most impactful individual on this game. And in between Wycombe's strong start and Charlton's strong finish, I feel like I just watched 90 minutes of soft fouls, silly fouls, clear fouls, fake fouls, players going down easily, and just a million whistles. And I don't even particularly criticise the referee, because it was a sort of game where every 2 seconds players were clattering into each other or challenging for the ball, and the tone was set early, but he was very whistle happy, and it made for a pretty tough watch. It was the last game of what's been a long 4 days, and maybe there's a bit of fatigue kicking in. But I think, like, with a game like this, it's actually quite helpful to hit the FOTMob corner button and make use of the sponsors of the Monday pod by just trying to dig in a little bit and find some nuggets of interest here. I mean, the overall match stats reflect what we all saw. I always find the fact that there is even a possession stat in this game funny, because it was 52% to 48%. There was a moment where Charlton had 55% of the ball, and the commentary said Charlton seeing a lot more of the ball so far, and I was like, no, it's just been in the air most of the time. Like, no one's got possession of the ball for the most part. There were very few passages of play where either team strung together more than 3 or 4 passes before making a ball forward and trying to play from there. So in terms of possession, basically similar. Expected goals in the end ends up almost exactly the same, 0.58 to 0.56. 7 shots each, 3 on target for Charlton and 2 for Wycombe. 1 big chance each per FOTMob. Even the accurate passes, 175 for Charlton, 157 for Wycombe. Fouls committed, 15 each. Corners 4-2 for Wycombe. So the picture is painted in the stats, as it was with our eyes, that this was an incredibly even game. You look at how many aerial duels there were, absolutely incredible. 54 aerial duels won for Wycombe, 53 aerial duels won for Charlton. So we did just see a game with over 100 aerial duels competed, split almost evenly in terms of who won them. It really was very difficult to split them. The FOTMob player ratings for the game are pretty perfect here, where you've got Will Norris topping the charts with 8.57 because he kept Wycombe level at the end there. But then it's just all the centre-backs, defenders and defensive midfielders: Sonny Bradley, Greg Doherty, Lloyd Jones, Will Mannion, Luke Leahy, Jack Grimmer, Kane Ramsey, Macaulay Gillespie and Josh Edwards and Caleb Taylor round out the top 11. And then at the bottom of the charts for FOTMob rating for this game, Udo right at the bottom, Onyedinma, Kone, Anderson, McCleary, who both came off the bench and didn't get many minutes, but then Berry, Campbell and Godden, the 3 most attacking players for Charlton. So that sums it up really. The attacking players found it very difficult to impact the game. The defensive players were the stars, if you like, as well as Norris. Jones at the back for Charlton and Bradley at the back for Wycombe. In particular, magnificent at the back, 16 clearances each. it was just a massive battle, wasn't it? And I think Wycombe should take a lot of credit actually for how they played and how they stood up to Charlton's physicality, with no Josh Scowen in particular, who's someone in midfield that normally relishes that sort of ratting, if you like, that sort of dual heavy midfield battle. So I think Leahy and Simons and Humphreys, none of whom are on the same level as Scowen on that front in terms of an appetite for a battle. I think they did pretty well, to be honest with you. Aerially, Sonny Bradley and Caleb Taylor at the back for Wycombe did a very good job for most of the game. And when needed, Norris made some astounding saves, particularly that one right at the end from Doherty, I think it was. At the top of the pitch for Wycombe, Udo and Onyedinma were both lively early, but faded pretty quickly after both missing chances. And Kone just finding it difficult, isn't he? Perhaps it's not that surprising that someone that's never played a full season at professional level is struggling in the last couple of months of a very, very long season, but he's very clearly not in rhythm. And, even outside of the fact that he didn't have a shot in the game, didn't look hugely dangerous in terms of being a goal threat. His hold-up play wasn't quite as commanding. His movement wasn't quite as slick as it was earlier in the season. And clearly, in terms of his temperament, he was struggling to handle the fact that he was finding it tough. I think from a Charlton point of view, the back line was strong and got stronger throughout the game once they handled that initial burst. Jones, as I mentioned, was massive. At the top of the pitch, they struggled as well. Godden was very quiet until that late chance. I do think that summed up how impressive he is just to keep going, keep making the runs, even though the passes are being headed back every single time. And eventually you do get a chance, get a good shot off and force the keeper into a good save. Tyrese Campbell had a tough game as well, didn't have as many moments on the ball as you would expect a talent of his nature. Berry was very quiet. And as predicted in the preview, with Small out, not injured, but unable to start the game, Tanai Watson as the right wing-back just meant a massively reduced attacking threat. We saw when Small came on, they just look a bit livelier when he's on the pitch, getting on the ball on the right side. All of a sudden, they've got 3 attacking players that you think can hurt you, 4, with him, Berry and the front 2, rather than maybe just the 2 or 3 that we saw in the first half. Doherty and Coventry, I thought, were brilliant in midfield, classically tenacious, up for the battle. They know exactly how to implement a Nathan Jones game plan. And I think just, again, in comparison to some of the other games we've seen, not a lot off the bench for either side, which I don't think helped the spectacle. McCleary came off the bench for Wycombe, otherwise just Vestergaard in injury time. And for Charlton, it was only Small or Anderson. So very clearly the worst game of the 6, Matt. Not one that we need to dwell on, but I think particularly, with the help of FOTMob, where there are so many stats for individuals and on a team level, you can always, whatever the score, find some interesting bits and bobs from any football match, any EFL match. They have data all the way down to League 2, as you know. So, as always, we recommend FOTMob, and we mentioned that the download link is in the show notes if you want to make sure you're using it for your live scores, but also so much more. We're at the end of the season now, which means all leagues are just absolutely jam-packed of large sample size data, and you can't love anything more than that, eh?
Given what happened on Easter Monday and given the way that Wycombe ended the season, do you think that actually they will be quite happy to take it to the Valley level, almost like a one-match shootout? Will they be quite happy with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think both teams will be broadly happy. I think we saw it in both managers' post-match interviews. Dodds was happy with how they responded to the defeat from a few weeks ago, the 4-0 reverse. Jones wasn't over the moon, but he was happy with how the team did defensively. They both basically found various different ways of saying that two teams cancel each other out. So clearly Charlton have the advantage and have been amazing at home at the Valley. But I think, and it's in the context of the other semi-finals. They've all watched 5 other games over the last 3 days. It's not nice going last. It's probably a bit weird playing on a Sunday at 6:30 p.m, to be honest. And look at some of the other scores. Bristol City had pretty much done 3-0 down. We had another 2-goal win for Walsall in the League 2 game. So for Wycombe just to avoid what a lot of people were predicting, which was that they'd get rolled over here, I think it is significant. And then there's the fact that those front players, they didn't sustain it, but just from what we saw in the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, Charlton are going to be kept honest if Wycombe can get good balls forward to those front players. Onyedinma's movement off the ball was good. Udo rolling in off the wings. If Kone can pull a performance out the bag, if they can stay strong at the back again, the tie is massively in the balance. We've seen 4 away teams win, so why not in the second legs? Why can't that happen again in the second legs?